At one point in your life, you've probably watched The Walking Dead, whether it was earlier in the season, and, oh, who am I kidding? You probably only watched it earlier in the season. You probably have not stayed on. You've probably one of those people who have gone and said, why is this show still playing? Like, why is this show still on? Well, what happened to this show? At one point in time, it was one of the highest viewing shows of all time. And it continued to do that. It soared. Every season, every episode, people were clamoring. It was that water cooler discussion at work that you would have with your coworkers, your friends, your family. Who died? What lived? What is going on? Did you see that zombie kill? Did you see where they're going next? All of these crazy things, all these crazy discussions happen. And in fact, I used to get a group of my friends, my family. We used to sit around and watch it every Sunday. And now I'm the last one watching it. Out of my group of friends, my close friends, I'm the last one. And some of that just happens to be that, I'm loyal. I'm going to stick with this show. Through its good, through its bad. But I'd be crazy to not say that, yeah, it did have definitely a dip in quality. And yeah, absolutely, it started to soar and come back through the last 2 seasons, I would argue. Did it ever actually come back to its peak? No. And what happened to that? Why is it? When did this start? And with the final 8 episodes finally coming out, what do I want from these final 8 episodes? What do I want to see? The Walking Dead is a phenomenon that I think is very interesting and a great discussion to have, specifically on its hold within pop culture. And I also am very interested to see how big of the fan base still is, even if a lot of them are not on social media. And the reason I say this is because when I go on social media, I don't see a lot of Walking Dead fans too often. What I do see, though, is people shitting on The Walking Dead. And I always feel like I have to be quiet about it for some reason. But earlier this year, I got to attend San Diego Comic-Con, which was the final Walking Dead panel for the actual just main show. And it was a heartfelt goodbye. The amount of Walking Dead fans in that Hall H panel was honestly, truly emotional to hear them all talking. And maybe that was, the 6,000 most, loyal fans. But I can guarantee that there's probably fans who did not get into Hall H. I was very fortunate enough to get into there and to hear the conversations that these people would have and the questions that they would ask the cast. It was truly something special to be a part of. But that's why I'm here. I'm here to talk about what happened. And hi, my name is Zach. Thank you so much for watching this. I am a giant Walking Dead fan. I've read the comics, I've watched this show religiously, I've rewatched this show religiously, and I love these characters. And I've played all the video games. I have not watched every show though yet. All the different spin-offs they have, I've given them all a shot. Some of them I know have gotten better than others. I just don't care. I care about these main characters. And that is what I've always cared about. And a lot of that comes down to my thoughts on the comic books. I love the comic books. Again, good, worse, bad of it all. I've really loved it. I love the characters. I love the artwork. And that was one of the things is that when this first season had premiered of The Walking Dead, my dad's like, hey, there's this new zombie show premiering tonight. Let's watch it. And we did, and I was instantly hooked. That week after, I had to have the comic books. And I begged and begged and begged for the comic books. And I finally, was able to scrounge up enough money from my parents to go and buy the first big compendium volume. And I read all through it within the next week. And I was not that type of kid to bring a comic book to school because I did not want to get bullied or harassed by my friends. But guess what I did? I was reading it through tests. I was reading it through everything. I didn't care how heavy that damn book was. I was here to talk The Walking Dead. And I was obsessed with it. I loved seeing everything that was going to come about it. And every time a compendium had come out, I would buy it. And I would read right through it to find out the rest of that story. And I think Robert Kirkman really much developed an impressive and unique world within The Walking Dead. And I think overall the show at first established that in a very good manner. I think with Frank Donapart being a part of the show very early on, gave it a flair and a feeling in that first season that is unlike anything else in the rest of the show. Because the show has definitely twisted and changed its tone a lot due to, of course, the amount of years that they've been in this apocalypse, the amount of time that they've spent in here, and in general, the heart of the show still resides that this is a drama about human beings during the apocalypse. Earlier on, a lot of it was not just human interaction. It was about surviving the zombies, but it started to escalate and change to where the zombies, they're definitely there, but the humans can be some of the biggest threats. Because now you have people who want dominance, control, power, And those are some of the more interesting aspects, specifically because I took a psychological class in college that actually discussed this, and the teacher used The Walking Dead as a lot of the times as a reference and a referral to really use for how human interaction can change. And I think us as fans, when we would first watch those first, I would argue, I think up to season 5, that is before the decline really started to happen. Everything in there was like top tier. Sometimes there was some lags and lulls in the episode, specifically everything on the farm. I think they took a little bit too long, and I'm going to talk about that with what I think happened to the show and what they really started to really focus on a little bit too much. But I was also happy to see how they did give a little bit more character development to certain characters that deserve that. Carol is an unbearable bitch in the comics, but in the show, she is one of the best characters that has ever lived. Daryl was never even in the comics, but he's been given a lot of character development lately. And that's my whole thing, is that for good or for worse, the comics are separate than the show. The show adapts and changes things, sometimes for the best and sometimes for the worst. So what happened though? What happened to The Walking Dead? All started on October 23rd, 2016. And I think this entire thing that started on that date lasted all the way to April 15th, 2018, where Glenn was killed by Negan on, again, October 23rd, 2016. And I can't forget, he also killed Abraham, which was very emotional and broke my heart too, because I loved Abraham and Glenn. And when Abraham died, I was like, oh my god, Glenn's safe. 5 minutes later, nope. Little game of eeny, meeny, miny, mo really changed everything. And for the best and worst, that is one of the best episodes of the entire Walking Dead space. It was also one of the most depressing. What comes after that is a long, dragged out war that just made Rick a little bitch. And it made Rick to be the character that we knew he wanted to be. He reverted back his character. It started to show the biggest issues of this show, is sometimes they did have no idea what to do with some of their characters. And specifically Rick throughout this entire arc. For a majority of this arc, he's like, oh, I don't know if we should fight. I don't know. Maybe we should just give in. But he's never been that way. And when he was compliant, there came a point where he should have just gotten past the breaking point. There's always a chance. There's always a revolt. There's always a rebellion that you can bring about in this. And it took Rick way too long to get to here. And for me, the Negan stuff in the comics is some of the best aspects. But in the show, it was some of the worst. Whereas when I look at the governor stuff, I think for the majority of the part, they adapted that actually just as good as the comics, if not sometimes better. Same thing with some of the stuff on the farm. I do think the farm got a little bit dragged out, but again, they elevated and gave a lot more to that entire storyline. And, you know, going past this one, if we just talk about the Whispers, I actually think they enhanced the Whispers in quite a few ways, and I think COVID actually delayed that with that whole finale and stuff like that. But when you look at the Whispers themselves, I actually think the Whispers were better developed in the show than the comics itself. And right now, as what they're doing with the Commonwealth, I actually am really enjoying what they're doing in the show, just a bit more than the comics. But I will say the comics still have, you know, Rick Grimes and Michonne and things like that. And that's some of the added aspects that I'm going to talk about in just a second. But everything changed. And the views started to fall. People stopped watching. Some because they just thought it was, you know, this is fucking stupid. Also because there was nothing to really root for that time. You know, the war that we wanted them to have really didn't start till a whole season later. And honestly, that war really didn't kick in till the end of that 8th season. And it dragged. It dragged and dragged the story. And the people still following along, they're like, yes, we've made it through. They're probably going to redeem Negan. Which us comic book fans absolutely knew they were going to do that. I was okay with it because I think Negan is an interesting character, and specifically with what they've done with him in the comics and the shows, whatever you want to talk about it, Jeffrey D. Morgan has done an amazing job. But for every person, it's not easy to revert that back. And that's again where you started to lose the fans. And every season from there, it was a steep decline. Now, they still get views. I mean, it's just not one of the highest things ever. And I think that's one of the discussions you need to be had is, yes, the views have absolutely dropped considerably. But people are still watching The Walking Dead. That's why they keep getting renewals. That's why they keep getting spin-offs. That's why we're getting a Rick and Michonne spin-off series next year. That's also why we're getting a Negan and Maggie spin-off. That's why we're getting a Daryl, and supposedly it was supposed to be Carol and Daryl, but now just a Daryl spin-off after the show's ended, which I have a whole rant on why they should not have done that, because now we know that those characters are safe. So that's just stupid. But my point being, the fans, it killed a lot of the fan base. All of my close friends at this point in time were done watching. They stopped watching the second they tried doing this. And I sat there and I'm like, no, you need to hop back on. Because they changed out the showrunner to Angela Kang, who I think has done an amazing job. And November 4th, 2018, Rick left the show. Andrew Lincoln, his final episode was that day. It was an emotional one. It was a fantastic episode too, as well as a great send-off. But that episode changed everything, because the second that episode ended, it did a time jump. Judith wasn't a baby anymore. We introduced the new characters. And from that time jump on, the show really hit its reboot style. It rebooted, it created, and this is a risk, but for me, I think it paid off. And they really brought this show back full circle. Now, did it fully work? No, there's still some weird tonal stuffs in there when it comes down to like certain characters such as Princess, and some weird wacky aspects that are a little bit hard to intersect into the world that you first started out with The Walking Dead. And when you go back and watch those first few seasons compared to the later seasons, there's this production value that just doesn't feel like it's totally there all too much. Sometimes it does feel a little bit cheaper now. Maybe that is a budget problem, maybe it isn't. I'm just, spitballing, but Negan killed everything. The All-Out War entire storyline killed it. But now we're in the final 8 episodes. And while the fans just kind of, a lot of the general going who is watching the show is just over it for the same reason of being, we just don't like this show anymore. It's just repetitive. It just keeps going, and they should have already ended it. That's why we have the final 8 episodes now. And I want to take just a couple seconds to really talk about what I want to see from these last 8 episodes. I want to see closure with almost all of these characters. I know we're getting spin-offs, but I do not want to see these characters just spin off into those. I want definitive closure with all these. The ending in the comic books is some of the best in ever, and I'm not going to touch on that because I do think they're really going to actually do that in this show. And the way that the show is going to end, they're going to do a version of that, clearly because they have already started to set that up. And if it works that way, it'll be an emotional finale, but it'll be one that has and is met with some weird reception. Not everyone loved the comic book ending. I was one of the ones that did, but I think the show could be able to bring that in. And now with the Rick and Michonne storyline coming about, I'm very interested to see how that all ties into it, because I still believe Rick and Michonne will show up in at least the final episode. If they are not in the final episode of the show, I will find it completely disappointing. And I know, again, we are getting their show next year, but if they truly go with the ending of the comics, which is a perfect ending for the show, that is like one of the main ways that you can give closure while also going out and doing these spin-offs that you want to do. If you give closure, you really need to hit it home. And you need those main characters. You need any character that is a main character there. And the 8 episodes has a lot to build off of. You got to finish the Commonwealth storyline, and you have to give closure to all the characters that we love. And for me, that is one thing that's going to be tough, because when it comes down to stakes, this show has missed it. And I think that's another thing that a lot of fans have been missing, is that there are no stakes anymore to this show. Again, we know Daryl, Carol, Maggie, and Negan are probably going to live throughout the season. Unless these spin-offs take place little storylines in between this, I doubt it. And for me, that's, a little bit disappointing, because we should not know who's going to not die next. The Walking Dead used to not be predictable on that. And I did a whole video where I talked about who I think is going to live and who I don't think is going to live. And when I was talking about characters who I think are going to die, it was, of course, Hornsby, a lot of the villains of this season, and a lot of just the background characters, because that's who you can kill without maybe pissing off the fans. And I wonder if they got nervous and scared because of everything that had happened with Glenn. But in reality, it wasn't because of just Glenn's death. It was because of the way they handled the Negan storyline, and it's the way that they handled that entire storyline and dragged out this show to where I think the show did not need to be 16 episodes per season. It should have been 8 to 10. That's a nice little in the middle where nothing feels like a filler episode. And I'm really hoping these last 8 episodes, nothing feels like filler. It truly is all quality content. And I have a feeling that they're going to pull it off, but we will see. This is what happened to The Walking Dead. Negan came on October 23rd, 2016, and changed the world forever. And that's where us as fans really start to play it off. And I think for me as just a fan, I'm excited to see where they go with this, but I also am curious to hear your guys' thoughts. So make sure to leave your thoughts down below. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. I will be doing one more big Walking Dead video, probably actually 2 more. I'll be doing a ranking of every single season, as well as reviewing the entire final season once it finally ends later this year. I might be doing some short reviews when it comes down to the actual episodes, but we will take a look and see. Let me know down below if you guys actually want that. But of course, until next time, guys, stay classy.